Have you got me now? Yes.
I'm can hear you now. Yeah.
It was the technology was escaping from me. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Like previous speakers, I want to congratulate everybody and thank everybody who's put on all this heroic work over the last few months, an unprecedented period of time. I mean, I don't think we've had a time like this for at least 100 years, where, let's put it this way, go back to January, February, none of us would have believed what had happened in the last 3 months. I don't think anybody would have done. And I think that the heroic work that's been done by our care workers and other people to carry on working through it so we could all live reasonably is wonderful. And I must say as well, having heard some of the stories from other authorities, I've got to say that I think I don't say this very often. I think we have functioned very, very well, and to a great extent, not always, but most of the time, the communications between ourselves has been good in doing that. But clearly, we need now at this stage to get back to some sort of accountability, proper accountability. I read the other day, Dr. Mike Ryan, who's the WHO's emergencies chap, and he was saying we need to learn to live with the virus, and warned that the expectation that we would eradicate it or get an effective vaccine could be really within months was unrealistic. And I think that's the point. We ain't, to quote somebody more eminent than myself, we are not at the beginning of the end, we are at the end of the beginning, and we've got to learn to work with this, and we've got to learn a way forward. As I say, my heart goes out to everybody who helped us during this period of time. I think they've done a wonderful job. I think we need to continue to do that job, and we've got to find new ways of working so that we can overcome this. Because the fact is, it's there, it's with us until we find a cure, and we've no guarantee of doing that in the short term. With that, I'll support the motion. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Is Councillor Finnigan back in? Councillor Finnigan?
Yeah,
okay,
I'm here, Lord Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Are you muted, Councillor Finnigan?
Don't think so. Not as far as I'm aware. I've only just this minute's been able to sign in, Lord Mayor.
Right, well, it's your chance to speak. Do you want to wait a few moments? Are you ready to speak?
Is this a response to the coronavirus report?
That's right.
Okay, let me run through what I've got, Lord Mayor, as best I can at this particular point. It's all a bit ad hoc at this particular point, but certainly from the Borough Independent point of view, we'd like to thank everybody who has contributed so much during this particular crisis that we found ourselves continuing to go through. And particular mention needs to go to adults and children's social services, care workers who've been absolutely fabulous, bin workers, street cleansing, parks and countryside, highways, volunteers, and especially the community hubs, and all other key workers as well. Certainly from the Borough Independent's point of view, we do send our grateful thanks that enabled them to be able to support a community under a great deal of stress, particularly the vulnerable. Particular thanks goes out to the community hubs. A lot of questions that need to be asked, not only on an international basis. The accountability of the Chinese Communist Party may be one of those, the World Health Organization and their failings, and the fact that they perhaps haven't offered the leadership that we would want. There are national questions to be asked, including what happened with the decision making that led to older residents being discharged to care homes without the appropriate testing and all the problems and difficulties that had. PPE provision, what failed there, including those PPE managers within the NHS who surely should be held accountable for their particular failings, and some of the PPE failings in some of the care homes. I think that's something that we need to go back and revisit when we have an appropriate opportunity to look into how we can cope with a similar crisis in the future. And we also need to ask some of the local questions. The community hubs have done an excellent job. They've been the ones who have been out there supporting the most vulnerable week in, week out. I think the City Council's financial support for the community hubs hasn't been as good as it might have been. Certainly, we have added additional financial support from Morley Town Council because we do appreciate the excellent work that they're doing, and we also appreciate the volunteers who are doing the nitty-gritty day in, day out. We think that that needs to be revisited, and we need to perhaps ask ourselves questions about why they aren't getting more financial support. From the Molybdenum Independence point of view, we were a bit puzzled why the City Council seemed to be more supportive of the teaching unions rather than families and students. As we all know, the people who have the greatest difficulty in these times are those children from low-income households and without being
Thank
able
you,
to get...
Councillor Finnigan. Time are up.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Councillor Dobson.
Good afternoon, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon. I can.
Oh, good. I'm only making that point because I've not got Zoom on my iPad, so I'm actually talking to everybody from an iPhone. So please bear with me. I hope that's okay. First of all, what's massively important is to pay congratulations to the many, many key workers here in Leeds who've really stepped up to the mark and beyond in the last weeks and months. And I will say, as a hub manager myself, it's probably one of the proudest things I've been involved in a 40-year working life, when I've actually seen the way that the third sector, the council, Voluntary Action Leeds, and a whole swathe of new volunteers have come forward to support the vulnerable people in the time of COVID-19. It's been a remarkable exercise, and I don't normally do this outside the budget meeting, but I am going to pay personal thanks to certain officers working in communities. Shahid Mahmood, who's led exemplary well, Martin Dean, Andy Birkbeck, who's been a constant source of information and good counsel when it's been needed in that sector. So thank you to everybody who's been involved working on the ground in communities. It's been a remarkable effort and one which the council should be rightly proud. I do think there's been departments that have been less quick to respond, or I'll rephrase that, quick to lock down, slow to unlock. I think that colleagues have already alluded to Parks and Countryside, and I really do think that as businesses have managed to track the mood music within government and be ready when announcements are there to reopen, I do think certain departments have been a little slow off the mark in that regard. Other lessons learned: virtual meetings don't work. The quicker and faster we can facilitate face-to-face meetings in a revised, safe format, the better, because this is unsustainable and I don't think it's put Leeds in a very good light this afternoon. Finances, of course, the council now faces a most precarious situation. And initially, I will say that communications between the leaders was good. There were clear, concise messages that we were all happy to support and push out. But in the last few weeks, I think that message system has diluted somewhat, and I've had to rely on picking the brains of officers to find out what's actually going on regarding the council's finances in our own city. And I will say this: there's lots of talent within the opposition groups who are willing and able to work with the administration should the call come. Let's hope we don't get a second spike, but let's prepare. What's the old adage? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, be resilient, keep doing what Leeds actually does best, which is pulling together when we have a crisis. And in the early days of COVID, I saw that remarkably across the city. So even though I've got a few concerns I've wanted to raise this afternoon and a few issues to flag up, I cannot fault the way that initially the council pulled together and did something that I think was extremely special and memorable. Let's just hope we never have to do it again, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nash.
Yeah, good afternoon, Lord Mayor. I speak as the Sport Executive Member for Art and Culture, which includes the Museum Service. And firstly, I should like to congratulate all of the museum staff for all their hard work. During the lockdown, the Museum Service has lost nearly £300,000, not only in admission fees, but also sales from its shops and its cafes, which our Labour administration brought back into house. The government has announced that it is to give £1.57 billion to support the cultural sector, which includes museums, but it is very unclear whether, if and when local authority museums will benefit, or will it just be for the Harewoods and Castle Howards? In view of its recent record of reneging on its promise to local authorities to reimburse whatever they had to spend on the COVID pandemic, I would not hold your breath. The government announced that museums could reopen on the 4th of July, but we cannot wave a wand and have all social distancing measures in place. Our priority has to be to keep our staff and customers safe. I am pleased to confirm the dates the following will reopen. Temple Newson's shop and the Art Gallery craft shop are now open. Lotherton and Kirkstall Abbey will open on the 17th of July. Leeds Art Gallery 21st of July. Leeds Industrial Museum 23rd of July. Temple Newson 1st of August. Abbey House Museum 4th of August. Leeds City Museum and Thwaite Watermill 11th of August. But during the lockdown closed period, our museum staff have not been taking a rest, but working very hard indeed. I just do not have time to read the... Yes? I do not have...
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes from now?
Yes. Well, it's
Right.
finished. 3 minutes finished, I'm afraid.
Right, okay.
So I'll call on Councillor Lamb. I'm sorry, Councillor Nash. Councillor Lamb. Councillor Lamb, could you mute it, please, if you're in the meeting? Councillor Iqbal, can I call on Councillor Iqbal?
Yes, hi, Lord Mayor. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak, and forgive me, Lord Mayor, I cannot pay the usual customary respect of standing up and speaking, and I think that goes for all of us. I think it has been clear to see throughout the city and the country that the fantastic work communities have done in order to support people throughout COVID-19. Can you hear me, Lord Mayor?
I can.
Okay, thank you. A simple shopping trip or visit to the chemist was no longer possible for some people. Other people had to completely cut off contact from their family and friends. Staying in the house for weeks and months on no end with no company is hard, especially for those living on their own. Ways had to be found to keep not only people physically safe and healthy, but their well-being too. The community have been fantastic in responding to the needs of our residents. There have been many examples of this throughout the city. The food warehouse that was set up to address those who needed our help the most, coordinated volunteer responses were established to operate citywide, linking in with established organizations and services who know their communities. In over 15 weeks, we have seen over 30,000 food parcels created from over 49,200 food bags distributed by the Emergency Food Service in Leeds. These organizations are really needed to look at how they can alter their services and provide people with the help they needed. I want to thank all our faith organizations in the city, although they were closed for they closed their buildings for worshipping. Instead, they started helping vulnerable people in the city. It's not just been the physical items either. Well-being and exercise classes have moved online. Activities to keep families entertained were shared through Zoom and Facebook to create an element of fun, positivity and hope. The people of Leeds have worked tirelessly to ensure that the safety of vulnerable individuals remained the #1 priority while we continue to battle this horrendous disease. How many people wanted to sign up to be a volunteer selflessly, putting themselves forward to support other people in the time of need? As an example, just week of May showed that through the Community Care Volunteers program, over 1,500 volunteers were deployed in just 1 week, an incredible response.
Councillor Iqbal.
Okay, I'll wind up then. I'll cut a bit out. I'd like to thank everybody involved with the coordination. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Is Councillor Lamb with us yet? Councillor Lamb? Could I call on Barry Anderson?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Can I start off by just reflecting back on something that happened at my scrutiny board last week, where we heard about the excellent work that the various community groups, neighbourhood networks and the churches, and the way people came together, and also the way that, to reflect a comment that's been said earlier on, that the way that Communities Department had risk tested a lot of the issues and were able to hit the ground running. That said, I do have a number of issues. I was just wondering if yesterday Martin Green, the Chief Executive of Care England, said that some councils were not passing all of the emergency government funding that was meant to be given to care homes, and if someone could confirm whether or not Leeds is actually one of those councils or not. They may have already passed it all on, and for that I would thank, and if not, if we can get an explanation. I would point out another issue, a group that have been missed out. There are a number of self-employed people in this city who have fallen between the cracks, both of what the government have done and of what the council have done. And I would have liked to have seen a bit more flexibility in the council's approach. I also think that as a council, we need to start quickly coming up with a won't pay, can't pay strategy. So identifying those people who cannot pay and give them help. But those people who won't pay need to be reminded that we're still delivering council services, and they need to start contributing towards it. Those that can't pay, I accept we've still got to help. I've also got concerns that planning enforcement don't appear to be able to come out and do anything. All we're asking them to do is come out, have a look. They don't have to go and speak to anybody. They don't have to go onto the premises. They could go and have a look on things. I would also raise concerns about the way some planning decisions are being made. There are also problems with people who are worried about school appeals and haven't heard anything, and this is causing issues. And we also need to be sure as well that we are going to be opening some playgrounds in the city. Now, we can afford to do the risk assessments, but some of the smaller parish councils cannot afford to do this. So is there any help we can give some of the smaller parish councils to help them do the appropriate risk assessments on their playgrounds in terms of what's happening? And the final thing is I sat in on a webinar by the Centre for Public Scrutiny yesterday, and there was a definite feeling that scrutiny should, throughout the whole of the country, take a larger role in helping councils move forward, particularly on the financial side, thinking the unthinkable, and also if we were to get a second spike, how the council might improve even further than they did just now as to how we can move things forward. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gartwright. Councillor Gartwright.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
I
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, my Lord Mayor, life has changed. For many, this is both distressing and inconvenient. But for people who run a business, it was a huge and is a huge problem. But we are helping. For example, the emergency active travel measures we've put in across the city, including the local district centres, help people get where they need to be in a safe and socially distanced way. So moving on to the city centre, it's important that the council provides a safe environment. So we've installed public hand sanitation stations, which are free to use, and carried out hot washing as well as disinfecting a whole lot of things that people touch, like benches. We've given over 3,000 free floor markers to businesses to manage queues, as well as distributing guidance to them on social distance measures. We've launched a team of 12 Leeds City ambassadors who are welcoming visitors back to the city centre. Encouragingly, so far, we've seen most people acting responsibly during an evening out, but we did launch a night marshal service for the 4 weekends of July to support opening the bars, clubs, restaurants and cafes. One of our key partners is Leeds Bid. They're running the Welcome Back to Leeds campaign to promote our great and diverse businesses and highlighting the many shops now reopening after this massive challenge. So moving on to Kirkgate Market. For the small independent traders and food vendors, it epitomises the struggle many businesses have faced. Before COVID, there were 136,000 people a week going to the market. In March, it plummeted to 17,000. But the market has adapted. Traders have risen to the challenge, and we've been there to help to support them. At the start, we set up a mail out via email service so we could keep in touch with our traders and update them with important government guidance. Feedback was positive. We've installed new signage and arrows on the floor. Again, with traders, we've improved the digital presence and put in delivery services and click and collect features and promoted that. When people interacted with social media during early lockdown, more people did that than ever before and helped link the shoppers and the traders. So customers are saying they feel safe shopping in market. As non-essential shopping has returned, we've worked with the kitchen traders and sectioned off seating areas for them to use so it's safer. Finally, last month, I was proud to open the New York Street entrance artwork called #Welcome alongside Councillor Pryor. It's a really perfect example of the attitude of Leeds being a safe, inclusive and welcoming space, especially during these really difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Hear me?
I can.
Thank you very much indeed. This whole COVID situation has been a massive shock to the whole country and also to the city of Leeds. And I'd just like to echo some of the comments which have gone before in acknowledging and thanking volunteers who have done such a great job. And I'm thinking in particular in my ward in Old Woodley, where mckenna had 180 volunteers and they did a tremendous job. And I would like to place on record my thanks to them and to all the others. But I just wanted to make 2 points and ask 2 questions really on the COVID recovery situation, because we do have to recover from this. One on the bus services and the other on the implications for climate emergency advice. Now, on buses, First has recently issued what amounts to a going concern warning following losses of £300 million. Now, should the company be forced to cease to operate, or should it choose to do so, what arrangements are in hand, including with WICA, to keep the buses running? As we all know, the whole point of the government's so-called EMA payments has been to enable key workers to continue going to work. So what measures are being planned to make sure that in that eventuality, those services can continue to operate? Now, on climate advice during COVID, as members know, the SEAT committee meets on Friday, And I wrote to Councillor Walshaw on the 18th of June about this, and we spoke briefly yesterday. And as my colleagues and I pointed out to him, the world is a very different place now to the one which pertained in February. For example, is the carbon neutrality target by 2030 now realistic, or should it now be an aspiration only? Can the city afford the very, very big, massive tree planting scheme that we had before? Fewer journeys to work will now take place post-COVID. What will be the longer term impact of this trend on clean air for the city? And most importantly, on the recovery, given the enormous difficulty facing the economy, would it not now be sensible to include in all green proposals a condition that no measure should be entertained which has or could have a negative effect on economic recovery and Leeds jobs? Thousands of jobs will have been lost and thousands of jobs will depend on this. And we must make sure as a priority that we put people's livelihoods absolutely first, second and third on this. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you.
My Lord Mayor,
Councillor Lamb.
Councillor Lamb.
Councillor Lamb.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry, I didn't know you were going to call me, so I've missed half of the debate, so apologies for that. But if I could add my thanks to all of those who've contributed to the effort and the response in the city, which has been phenomenal. There's too many to mention, but particularly in my ward, I'd like to thank all those volunteers. We've had a fantastic community hub, probably one of the best and the exemplars in the city. I suspect the manager is listening to this, so I'd like to pass on my thanks to him and all of his team who've done an incredible job, and all of the volunteers in our area and across the city for the response they've had. It's fair to say there's been lots of good things and lots of positives that have happened in the city. There's lots of good things about the council's response that we've been pleased to support, but it was disappointing. One contribution I did hear right at the start was from Councillor Charlwood, and the very first thing she did was attack the government about PPE. Now, as Councillor Carter said, it is an unprecedented challenge that the city and the country have faced. And you could put the same challenge straight back to Councillor Charlwood. Why didn't she take the chance to stockpile PPE? It's one thing to criticise the government. Why didn't she do it? It's also worth noting some of the things the government have done to support the city and the economy. Speaking as someone who has been battling to keep a business going over the crisis, it's fair to say the government have stepped up to try and support the business community and the city. And the next stage for this city is to really get behind our businesses and give them the best chance of getting going. Things like looking at car parking so that people will come and visit the city centre. Things like looking at how we get the city moving, how we encourage people back into shops and businesses and services, looking at the planning system to see how we can quickly support businesses to adapt and change, potentially looking at change of use of buildings. I think we all know as home working is here to stay. Hopefully these kind of meetings are not here to stay, because I think if there was any doubt before that they don't work, we know from this afternoon that the sooner we get back into proper meetings face to face, we could do it now. We know the technology is there. It can be done socially distanced. It does give the opportunity for those that can't to be here, and it is absolutely essential on behalf of everyone in this city that we have the right to hold this administration properly to account. And until we're meeting properly, we can't do that. So I'll leave it there, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Lord Mayor, as a city, we've been working hard to address homelessness throughout Leeds and how we can best support some of our most vulnerable citizens. However, this pandemic has presented a real challenge in support and how we can support people. We've shown commitment and dedication, working in partnership with services throughout the city to ensure that the safety of some of our most vulnerable individuals in Leeds. We've really had to look at ways in which support can be provided Accommodation with communal spaces had to be addressed, as well as houses with multiple occupancy. We've supported most of those on the streets and worked hard to ensure that everyone was placed into some form of emergency accommodation. I'd like to thank the housing team, Safer Leeds, and all other services which have been involved. A challenging situation at the best of times, however, worsened throughout the pandemic. You will be aware of the food warehouse that was set up that had to be made in order to deliver food packages to those shielding and unable to leave their houses for food. Every day, 230 homeless people had received breakfast and lunch who were recently being rehoused in hotels and B&Bs. That is 1,610 breakfasts a week and 1,610 lunches a week. All thanks to the teams and volunteers who were supporting the food banks and still continuing to support the food warehouse. In addition to this, we had to ensure that our council tenants were kept safe throughout this time. Calls were made to ensure that they had everything they needed, and if there could be any other things that could be done throughout the pandemic, also linking them with other support services as required. They also, our staff and the team, did above and beyond what was required of them to ensure that all the tenants were in a safe environment. This has been a testing time, and we know that it comes with additional challenges and pressure. However, the way in which, as a city, we've been able to adapt and still provide support to those at their most vulnerable has been fantastic.
Councillor Milton.
Well, thank you, Lord Mayor. I had a lot more to say, but thank you.
3 minutes gone. Councillor Amanda Carter.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to offer my condolences to those who have very sadly lost their relatives during this pandemic, and express my appreciation to those who've worked and volunteered throughout the crisis, and to all our residents who've played their part in such difficult times. Understandably, the report deals with the visibility aspects of services such as bin services, food packages and deliveries, PPE, etc. Things that you can see and measure. In fact, our community committee has given funding to the Samaritans because of the rise in serious mental health issues because of the lockdown. But what concerns me a great deal are the unseen consequences of the lockdown from a community safety point of view. And I fear that this will continue to have an impact long into the future. For example, Safer Leeds Domestic Violence and Abuse Team reports a 25% increase in MARAC cases since the introduction of lockdown. The true scale could sadly be much higher, and since restrictions of lockdown and social isolation have been necessarily meant that people are more likely to be indoors together with fewer outlets, I want to see a great deal more work done in this area through Safer Leeds and the Police and Crime Commissioner to plan for potential surge in cases coming through the system and to support victims. I welcome the government's funding provided for services supporting victims of domestic abuse and sexual abuse. I understand that about £500,000 has been distributed across organisations in West Yorkshire for delivery between March and October, and ring-fenced for COVID-19 related emergency funding. Looking at some of the figures coming to the Police and Crime Panel later this week, there's a comparison of the impact of crime levels in West Yorkshire compared to nationally. As you can imagine, crime has actually come down in the country, through the whole country, whilst West Yorkshire compares favourably in some areas, such as burglary, which has fallen from 44% to 34%, and nationally that compares. Other measures show a starker difference. Violence against a person has fallen only 13% in West Yorkshire, compared to 25% reduction nationally. As we move out of lockdown, people are already gathering in large numbers, and we rely upon the police to protect our safety. Our police have been subject to insults, they've been spat at, and indeed they've had violence committed against them. As a council, I'd like to make it crystal clear we will not tolerate such behaviour or violence against our police. My Lord Mayor, I'd like to finally place on record my thanks to the police who have worked incredibly hard under often very difficult circumstances during lockdown. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna. Councillor McKenna. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would also like to associate myself with the comments made by other members. Our deepest sympathy go to those who lost loved ones in this coronavirus crisis, and we shouldn't forget that we have lost 2 of our own. My last briefing, I'm aware that 2 officers have passed away through coronavirus, and our thoughts are with them and their families. Similarly, we should also celebrate some of the great work that's taken place. The community hubs, Wetherby in support of the elderly, have done a brilliant job in our area. We also have Garforth Net, who cover some of our southern villages. I'd particularly like to mention some individual groups who've popped up during coronavirus and have shown the ingenuity of our residents. Andy Nicholson, Angela Hannafin, Bob Bailey, who've organised groups like Skulls Cares, Barrack Cares, an Aberford support group, a Thorner Cares group, and they've all not waited for leadership from the council. They've just gone on and got things started, and that's made a really big difference to groups like Wetherby in support of the elderly. But if our city is going to be open after coronavirus, then we need a council recovery plan that shows we are getting back to work. I've had some mixed responses from residents who've suggested to me that some departments are very willing and able to get back out there and meet with residents and start working through that backlog, and others have got no return date and cannot suggest any date to our members. Similarly, I know that Lotherton Hall, and I hate to undermine the Deputy Executive Member, but Lotherton Hall announced an hour ago that they won't be opening on the 17th. They are still delayed, so hopefully in the summing up, the Leader of Council can say when Lotherton will be going back, because it's so important that we start to get income coming back into the council, and opening up facilities like Lotherton is key to that. I've asked in the past about youth activity funding. We know that youth activities won't be able to take place as they would do normally through the summer period, which is the busiest for all of our wards. If the purse strings are loosened a little and the handcuffs taken off, we can use youth activity funding in different ways to help support community groups and help support young people who are the most hard to reach and who we need to make sure have the skills to get jobs and help them to improve our economy. Finally, I also want to mention about public transport. What has been highlighted to me is that there are huge difficulties around public transport at the moment, and the lower service that has been seen in some of the outer areas of the city have left people completely cut off, not just from getting to work, but from supporting family, friends and loved ones, or even being able to get to the shops. If we're having a transport strategy, we need a really holistic transport strategy for this city. And I hear the buzzer, so I'll pause there, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Sorry, you moved on quickly when I was trying to unblock my microphone and camera last time. Can I start, please? Lord Mayor, it's clear from my colleagues' speeches that teams across the council have carried out great work during the pandemic to support our residents. I'd like to continue that theme by paying tribute to the work of our environmental services team throughout the crisis. With people being unable to eat out and staying in more to keep the infection rate down, there has been a big change in how we get rid of our waste. I'm told that our waste services were dealing with an extra 20% tonnage in black bins and an extra 8% in green bins, all while many of their own colleagues had no choice but to stay at home and shield. Keeping our bin collection running week after week must have taken a huge effort, and I'd like to thank all the workers who managed it despite the heavy load. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the Cleaner Neighbourhood team who went around all the streets litter bins to empty and tape them up, and then removed the tape and stickers as the lockdown was eased, while removing all the fly tipping that was sadly still taking place. Continuing to work outdoors as the pandemic became more and more serious was a big ask, and it showed their commitment to the job and to the city, and this work was still carried out. Leeds came out particularly well when it was time to reopen our tips, while other authorities saw queues outside for hours on end. We took the time to set up a booking system which kept disruption to a minimum. I know that this was achieved with the help of workers redeployed from services like Civic Enterprise, Active Leeds and Leeds Building Services, so I'd also like to offer my gratitude to them. Overall, I think the council and our dedicated workers have coped with the environmental safety impact of the pandemic very well, and it has shown why well-run council services are vital to our residents. I'm sure that councillors and residents alike appreciate the huge effort of everyone during the difficult time. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Lay.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I didn't really know where to pitch my speech today. There's just so much that could be said, but with the time allocated, I'm going to offer thanks to the thousands of people that have worked tirelessly to keep us safe, keep us well, and to keep us connected, not just in an online way, but in a we're all in this together way. But first, like so many, my thoughts are with the nearly 650 residents of this city that have died due to COVID. And also let us not forget the nearly 400 estimated deaths of key workers. May they all rest in peace. I also want to pay tribute to the family and friends of our frontline workers, wives, husbands, children, often young children, as they continue to watch and wave their loved ones off to the hospitals, their care homes and other people's homes. It's remarkable just how stoic these families are. I'm afraid I don't have time to discuss our government's response, other than to say that Dominic Cummings should have gone to Specsavers rather than Barnard Castle, that the Health Secretary counts tests like Boris counts new hospitals, and Gove, well, Gove is just Gove. I'm sure over the coming months and years I'll have ample time to comment on their performance, but I really did want them to succeed. I really, truly did. But there you go. Back to thanking those that have gone the extra mile. So I'd like to thank all the organisations and volunteers that stepped up, served their community and helped in the hour, well, weeks, sometimes months, of need for our most frail, vulnerable and at-risk residents. In my own community, that means thanking Otley Action for Older People and Otley Courthouse for all they did. And in Yeadon, AVSED did the same in reducing isolation and the fear of isolation. Whether it was shopping, collecting and delivering medicines or by making thousands of telephone calls, they took the strain, delivered the care and compassion and proved once and for all what an asset they are to this city. On a Leeds level, to all our key workers, whether you're a consultant in a hospital or a cleaner in a supermarket, you have done us proud. You've demonstrated that money does not always equate to value. Finally, if you remember back in March and April, the mantra was stay safe, protect the NHS, save lives, and let's flatten the curve and get through to summer. I don't know anyone in my other role that isn't fearing and planning for a second wave and an upsurge in cases come winter. But having sat through 2 virtual health scrutiny boards, I'm confident that locally we're doing all we can to minimise harm, maximise safety and protect all of us, whether we are a key worker, a patient or a resident. Let's just hope the government have learnt their lessons. So stay safe, stay well, stay connected and stay working together to hold back this virus until the vaccine or cure is found. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm speaking today to pay particular tribute to the volunteers in Horsforth who've pledged their time to help those shielding, self-isolating, or otherwise struggling due to the coronavirus pandemic. Nearly 300 residents signed up to help in some way, with around a third of that number taking the time out to help. As in many other parts of the city, the offer to help turned out to eclipse the need, which is a testament to the generous nature of our communities. In my ward, we established the Horsforth Community Aid Project, or HCAP. The committee is made up of trusted community-focused residents who came together to ensure those who needed help received it. HCAP has coordinated volunteers to provide personal shops for residents, make up and deliver food parcels, and help with offers for daily routine tasks, such as collecting prescriptions and walking the dog. HCAP wouldn't function without those volunteers who came together at the start of the pandemic to get this project off the ground. We also extend our thanks to the Central Methodist Church and those who worship there for their kindness, generosity and community spirit for allowing us to use the building to ensure that our community has been supported. As mentioned, I'm joined on the committee by local residents, and the significant personal investment committed by them should be recognised. Woodside Town Councillor Chris Calvert arranged our first meeting and has been instrumental in coordinating volunteers. Our local Morrison's community champion Sarah Marston has provided and donated supplies for our food boxes. Landlady of the Old King's Arms, Lindsay Clark, Leeds Council Officer Vicky Madeley, Claire Birch, Kezia Roberts, Nikki Morris and Lisa East have all contributed significant time and effort to HCAP. I'd also like to thank our ABCD coordinator Claire Evans, who has supported much of the governance of the project amongst other things, Duncan Stowe from Horsforth Churches Together and Reverend Nigel Sinclair for support on the steering group, which has contributed to an almost smooth running of the project so far. Just two final acknowledgements, my Lord Mayor. Firstly, to Sally Metcalf, who has been seconded from Horsforth Live at Home to help with the daily running of HCAP. It's fair to say that Sally has given an extraordinary amount to the project, ensuring vouchers are issued, shops are completed, and the phone is answered. Sally has been instrumental to the success of HCAP, and Horsforth truly owes her a debt of thanks. Secondly, and finally, to Horsforth resident Penny Pinn. At the start of the pandemic, Penny converted her popular community cafe into the food arm of HCAP. Penny has been on site most days, coordinating large numbers of volunteers to pack food boxes and have them delivered across Horsforth. Penny has also fundraised for the project, ensuring that no food is wasted by setting up Penny's pantry outside her house on a pay-as-you-feel basis. I know I speak for my two ward colleagues, Councillors Collins and Schemmel, when I say our effort here could not have been as comprehensive without the time and effort of those mentioned, and I'm pleased to have had the opportunity to recognise them in this forum. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Can I now call on Councillor Blake to sum up? Councillor Blake, you've missed your early one, so you can regain your 3 minutes in the time.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'm really sorry I had problems getting on the call at the beginning, so I did some of the earlier contributions before we over to this call, but I had wanted to open the debate by first of all saying that I particularly wanted to have this special report come to Council just for all of us to acknowledge the real significance of the impact of COVID-19 across the city. And it's very difficult to really imagine going back to the last time we were in the Council chamber together in late February discussing the budget for this year and everything that has happened since then. I was particularly keen for us to come together because I think it's important that we all have the opportunity to express our real concerns for the immense impact this has had on every single person's life. And I don't think we've ever experienced anything as far-reaching as this. And it's, you know, very stark to think we've lost 645 people to the virus in Leeds and the impact that that has had on all of their families. And to put this in the context of 45,000 almost across the country is something that none of us wanted to see at all. And the real concern we have. Of course, we all worked hard to protect the NHS, which was the real mantra, but what we all have an enormous responsibility now to encourage people to go back to using the NHS. And I have enormous concern about increased deaths in the near future as a result of people not presenting when they have signs that they have problems. And that is something we all have to come together to really take account of the fact that the NHS has done incredible work to make sure that they can see patients safely. Really today, I think, is an opportunity for us all to come together to thank all of our staff and in fact to thank all of you who have really stepped up to the plate in your communities. But our staff have just been extraordinary, as they always are when we are facing a crisis. And I know all of our directors have been passing on our thanks, but I think it's important from this council meeting today that all of us come together to show our real appreciation to them. And I know if we were in the room together, we would do that. We would stand, we would applaud and really demonstrate just how grateful we are for the work that they have done so far, are continuing to do, and as we know, we'll have to continue to do into the future. But also the true spirit of Leeds coming through, the real partnership work that just came together so quickly. So key workers across all of the frontline public sector, but our businesses too. And of course, most importantly, the people of Leeds, and the really phenomenal response when the call went out asking for volunteers to help the most vulnerable across our communities. And many of you have spoken very movingly today about the work that has happened in our communities, and thanks go out to everyone who has made that possible. We really, I think, should be really noting and grateful of the work that we've done through our public health teams, the fact that we still have infectious disease workers in our cities, and belatedly a recognition from government that actually it's local authorities who have the expertise to actually do the work in our communities. And I think we all should be very grateful for Tom being seconded into government to help them get across the message to the government about how important the local response is in situations like this. I have to also acknowledge the phenomenal work that's happened across our care sector, both in adults and in children's, and that has been some of the most heartbreaking and difficult situations that we've had to face. I just want to say to Barry, yes, in Leeds we have been passing on the money. It's a very, very complex situation, so I just want to reassure you that we're not on the list, and we have already paid out around £12 million to them. But what I think we have to understand is that for all the good work that's been done, for all the communication, the thanks that we've had from people in our communities for the communication, the way they've been kept informed, we can't be complacent. The pandemic is not over. We are in a situation of learning to live with the virus. And if we have situations where certain facilities or sectors decide that they're not ready to move forward, we have to assume that that is based on the best health and safety advice that is available to them at that time, and respect the decisions that are being made. Of course, what we know is that the economic impact on our city is going to be immense. We know that many businesses are suffering, and we know that many people have lost jobs. We have been in a position to respond swiftly to the grant programme that came our way, and I do thank government for that, but over £142 million worth of money going to 11,500 businesses is a real achievement. But we know that there has been already a 42% increase in the number of people in Leeds on universal credit. And that is something that we're really concerned about. I was obviously very active in campaigning for government to continue the free school meal entitlement over the summer holidays, and I'm disappointed to let you know that new claimants in that period will not be eligible for free school meals. I think this is something we should continue to lobby on. But what I have to say is there is a huge amount of work going on at local level, in communities, at Leeds level, West Yorkshire, feeding up to national in terms of the economic recovery. But we have to get the response to the health emergency in place for that to be successful. Our local outbreak board is up and running, and we have some really excellent contributions already coming forward, really helping us to understand the different settings, the different needs.
Councillor Blake, only a couple of seconds. If I could just finish off by saying, Lord Mayor, that you know, we understand the complexity of the situation we're facing, but if local government is not given the resource it needs to come through this crisis, then we might face a situation where we face a second spike in the winter with local authorities such as Leeds looking at reducing the frontline services we have. This cannot be allowed to happen, and I hope cross-party in this council we will continue to work to explain to government how important it is that we get the full compensation that we deserve for having stood up so strongly together to deal with the worst excesses of the immediate impact. But there is a long way to go. I know there will be many inquiries into the handling of the different aspects. Councillor Blake.
And what we continue to do, Lord Mayor, is to say that these events need to be managed locally, and we need strong local government to enable us to go forward to enable the recovery that we desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go for the vote. All members who are against are abstaining. Could you please say, if you're all in agree, please remain quiet. So can we go to the vote? That's been carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to the non-debate white papers. So can I call on Councillor Carter?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm delighted to be able to move this not for debate white paper in the terms of the notice, which is that this council wishes to place on record its thanks and appreciation to all the NHS staff, key workers, teachers and volunteers who have worked tirelessly to help protect and support the people of Leeds during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm pleased, given the last debate, that this has all party agreement. I so move.
Councillor Campbell?
I second, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Blake?
Very pleased to support, yes.
Councillor Hutchison?
Fully support my Lord Mayor.
Councillor Field?
Fully support, Lord Mayor.
And Councillor A. Blackburn?
Fully support, Lord Mayor.
Okay, I'll now go for a vote, and it's remain against and abstain. Could you shout out? And all those in favour remain silent.
That's been carried. Thank you. We'll move on to item 8. Question to the Executive. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can the Executive Member for Learning, Skills and Employment confirm if the Council has received a response from the Department for Education to an application in 2018 requesting powers of innovation to run unregistered provision and seeking clarity on whether the Council's provision was legal? And if so, did the Department for Education agree with the Council's request?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Carter. I know the wider issue around area inclusion partnership provision is something that you've obviously been interested in for a long time. And obviously I think there's a bit of confusion about this, so I'm keen to provide Council with a bit of a snapshot of the background to Councillor Carter's question. So the original 2012 Department for Education Power to Innovate pilot gave permissions to selected local authorities to explore their own solutions to the growing number of exclusions in the country. Leeds was part of this pilot, and we set up the concept of area inclusion partnerships, who promoted inclusion, prevented exclusion, and provided support. Leeds has got no local authority maintained pupil referral units. So this approach Leeds took was recognised nationally, and I hope that all members can be proud that Leeds now has one of the lowest exclusion rates in the entire country. But the essence of the Power to Innovate bid was to establish a local authority virtual school for children with specific social, emotional and mental health needs, which would have a unified DFE registration number. And this would be accountable for ensuring and monitoring safeguarding, well-being and positive outcomes for learners, and will be subject to Ofsted inspection. This was in response to a suggestion that each provision may need to go through separate registration processes with all of the potential difficulties that would entail. So the Leeds proposal was to reassure and allay any concerns of the DFE. Essentially, this was a belt and braces approach we offered up in case the DFE had any ongoing concerns. The DFE looked at the proposal and they were sympathetic to the Leeds position, and they sought clarity on exactly what Leeds were asking. They stated that if Leeds were requesting to suspend sections 96 and 97 of the Education and Skills Act 2008, which relates to the operating of an unregistered independent school, and sections 98 and 99 of the same act, which requires to register an independent school, then they could not agree. But we gave clarity that this was not what the request was. There were a series of discussions that then ensued with the DFE to ensure a shared understanding. The final discussion, which was just prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, is a correspondence from James Vance at the DFE, which I know Councillor Carter's seen. It was in a recent FOI that Councillor Carter put in, and that says that, and I quote, "I agreed to try and set out the issues we discussed to support further discussions with the DFE/Ofsted with yourselves. Leeds do not believe these settings are operating as independent schools or that registering these settings as independent schools is appropriate. You view them as inclusion units which are part of existing school provision," and that point is key. Secondly, the letter, and I'm still quoting, "The arrangements have evolved from the 2012 exclusions trials and involve settings that multiple schools in the locality use to make provision themselves. 3, they are funded by the local authority high needs block, which is often funneled through a Leeds school. From that, one obvious route to provide clarity would be to confirm that these units are operating as part of a Leeds school through which funding is provided and which is responsible for employing the staff. If this is the case, then the unit is part of the registered provision provided by the Leeds school." And that's the end of the quote. So we confirmed with the DFE that that was the case in March 2020, therefore negating the need for a Power to Innovate proposal, and there have been no further correspondence with the DFE. I hope that clarifies where we are with Councillor Carter, but of course I'm more than happy to arrange for further information should that be required. Thank you.
Have you got a supplementary, Councillor Carter?
I have, my Lord Mayor.
Okay,
I am informed, and Councillor Pryor needs to answer this, by the regional schools commissioners, that the conversation on the 2018 letter and the request for suspension, which has not been granted, is still subject to discussion. and they have asked for further evidence about the provisions in order that they are able to check their legality, and I quote, "So, Councillor Pryor, you still seem to have a number of questions to answer as to whether the provision is legal or not, do you not?"
Councillor Pryor.
I'm sorry, I think there's still some confusion. I did answer that question in the answer. Let me go over some of that again, because I want to be really clear on this. So to summarise and confirm the current Leeds model, Leeds Area Inclusion Partnerships have used their devolved funding to establish learning inclusion units within mainstream schools in their local areas. These inclusion units offer focused, targeted and high-level support to learners who are at risk of exclusion and vulnerable to poor outcomes on a short-term basis. It means that specialist practitioners work with both the learner and the school, ensuring that their needs have been addressed and that all the tools and practices are in place for the learner to make a successful long-term return to mainstream education. Learners accessing support in these units must remain on the role of their mainstream school, and that mainstream school must continue to be involved with the learner and actively plan for their re-inclusion, or in the small number of cases where assessment deems it necessary, their progression to specialist education. The learner's mainstream school retains responsibility and accountability for the learner's outcomes, ensuring that the school remains invested in the learner's development. Progress and outcomes for each learner are monitored and reviewed by the Area Inclusion Partnership and are regularly reported to the LA, which in turn analyses those outcomes and provides support and challenge accordingly. So this approach seeks to maintain the connection between the learner and their mainstream school, avoiding dislocation and disengagement. But crucially, it also prevents the highly criticised practice of off-rolling, which we've spoken about in council before, whereby a mainstream school removes learners less likely to attain from their role, redirecting them to an alternative education provision to avoid the impact of their lower attainment on the school's reported outcomes. This is a practice which can clearly be detrimental to those displaced learners. And I am pleased, in fact, that the Council Land Scrutiny Board is continuing to look at this practice. Now, if Councillor Carter is saying that he's got additional information, I implore you to send that through, but that's not something I have. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Councillor Galton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. On the third anniversary of the residents of Sugar Hill Estate receiving a standing ovation after telling us of their plight of facing eviction and demolition of their homes to make way for a new housing estate, can the executive member for communities tell us whether she still stands by her refusal to approach the landowner to purchase the current properties to convert to new council houses?
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Galton, for the question. And I do indeed remember that deputation to council and the residents showing great passion and community spirit in their campaign. The council, in its capacity as local planning authority, considered the landowner's planning application, and members of the plans panel determined it as a refusal. The landowner has taken up the opportunity to appeal against this decision, which means the application will be considered by an independent planning inspector on behalf of the Secretary of State. I can assure members of council that the council will present the best case it can to defend its decision to refuse planning permission, and has appointed a team of appropriately trained professionals to fight the appeal, led by a barrister. Independent of the council's view of sustainability of the properties, to which I will come, clearly the future and value of Sugar Hill site will vary substantially according to the decision on the appeal. So it makes little sense for the council to be discussing matters with the owner now. Once we are aware of the decision, then we will engage accordingly. It's not appropriate for me to comment further while the planning process is still ongoing. However, I will, of course, be more than happy to contact all those involved and assist where possible once that decision is finalised.
Have you got a supplementary, Councillor Galton? Sorry.
Yes, Lord Mayor. Sorry, I was waiting to be unmuted. By way of supplementary, can the executive member please clarify whether her refusal to approach the developer is based upon the planning situation that we have right now, or is it based on the fact that she, as the person in charge of the council's housing portfolio, refuses to consider purchasing properties which she has herself classified as defective and beyond repair?
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cooper.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry. Yeah, and again, thanks for the supplementary, Councillor Galton. I know that you and I have been in correspondence about this issue, and indeed, I've been in correspondence with the residents as well about the self-same issue. And as I've already said, once the planning process is over, I'm more than happy to be involved with those said residents once again, and yourself as the ward member, Councillor Galton. I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment further while we're still undergoing the planning process, as I've said.
Councillor Ray.
Would the executive member for Learning, Skills and Employment like to join me in thanking all school staff for the amazing effort they've put in to ensure education of the city's children during the COVID crisis?
Councillor Pryor.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Yeah, I would be delighted to join you in that. I think on behalf of all the council, we do owe a huge debt of gratitude to all school staff. And I am really proud as the exec member of how Leeds has really pulled together to ensure that children have continued to receive an education throughout the COVID crisis. So schools in Leeds and across the country actually have worked tirelessly to ensure that vulnerable children and the children of key workers could remain at school. And without this in place, it meant that other parts of our country just could not respond in the way that was needed. Without them, the country would have just ground to a halt as doctors, nurses, anaesthetists, refuse workers, postal workers, supermarket workers, delivery drivers and others just found themselves unable to go to work due to childcare issues. But in addition to remaining open throughout the crisis, schools have also provided comprehensive online learning for the thousands of children who've remained at home. This hasn't been easy, and I am immensely proud of every single one of our schools. They've risen to what has been an immeasurable challenge. Now, as we're looking forward, it is vital that children do return to school in a safe way, both for their own safety, the safety of staff, and I've been involved, along with Councillor Blake, with regular Zoom calls with head teachers across the city, talking about their concerns, going through guidance, and that's meant that a coordinated approach based on sound principles has been able to take place. And I'm really pleased that our approach has been welcomed by schools and parents. Our priority is and always has been to get children back to school safely, not just herd them in regardless of risk, but safety has always been key. And I'm pleased that our measured approach, based firmly on risk assessments and decided jointly with schools, has been proven to work, and the return to school to Leeds has been much smoother than it could have been. So once again, a huge thank you to everyone involved in keeping our schools open and our children educated. It's been hugely appreciated. Thank you.
Have you got a supplementary, Councillor Ray?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you for that. And does he have any comment on the recent issued Department for Education guidance on schools returning in September and the impact on schools in Leeds?
Thank you for that, Councillor Ray. I know this will probably be of interest to Councillor Stevenson too, who had a question on this, but sadly I don't think we'll reach that one. So schools have been told to reopen in September and that they must use their existing resources to make the adjustments that are needed to ensure the safety of both pupils and staff. Yet actually there are no plans at present to reimburse schools for the huge additional costs incurred as part of that process. One primary school in Leeds that we've spoken to has said it will cost them an additional £8,000 to install external sinks needed for children to wash their hands before entering the building. That's £8,000 they haven't budgeted for, and £8,000 that they seemingly won't get back. Now, this is on top of, and it's a figure I've used in council before, but since 2010, schools have had their funding cut by 8% per pupil. So schools are already struggling with their budgets after a decade of austerity, and then the government isn't confirming that they're going to support them in this. We want all children to be able to return to school, but the guidance recently published by the government actually raised more questions than it answered. The sheer logistical challenge of bringing back an entire school, particularly a secondary school, all in one go, is enormous. The suggestion, for example, is for staggered start, finish, break and lunch times. But for a school with 300 pupils per year group, that's almost an entire day taken up with pupils either arriving, eating, on a break or leaving. If the lunch break is 30 minutes, that's 3.5 hour lunch, plus time, and that's not even accounting for the time that would need to be taken between each year group to clean the dining hall. If you have staggered start and finish times, how will transport to and from school be managed? How many more buses do we need? How many more drivers? Do those extra buses and drivers that we need even exist? And who will pay? An estimate on what the government's advice on travel arrangements would be could cost this council up to an additional £5 million. And the government hasn't confirmed whether they'll cover these costs. The guidance merely just says that further information will be issued. However, they are very quick to point out that it's the statutory duty for home to school transport for many children, and that rests with the local authority. The guidance states that social distancing won't be necessary on dedicated school services, even though bubbles will be mixing. Pupils travelling on public transport will be subjected to the same rules around social distancing and face coverings as everyone else, although they're also encouraged not to fill up the public transport during peak times, with walking and cycling encouraged. There are a huge amount of questions from this government guidance. But as we did with preparations for the schools gradually expanding their opening back in June, we are continuing to work in partnership with our schools to ensure that pupils and staff can return in a safe fashion. We all want to make sure that gaps in attainment are narrowed, and our schools have been doing an outstanding job in unprecedented times. We can only work to close those gaps, though, if parents have the confidence to send their children back to work. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gettins.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Although colleagues have provided information, I would like to ask, in regards to the dramatic rise in the number of people who are begging in the city centre and the increase in the number of people who are homeless, can Council be updated on how our city is dealing with this current crisis?
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Gettins, for the question. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has done its utmost to ensure that its citizens are safe at this time. We have a particular duty to support the homeless and rough sleeping community at this time. The government has also instructed us to accommodate all rough sleepers and people living in hostels with inappropriate sharing living spaces. To meet demand for separate bedrooms, Leeds City Council have had to source additional accommodation. This has included 5 hotels, private accommodation providers and the reopening of supported facilities. The accommodation range includes bedroom, hotel apartments, standard hotel rooms and private lets. We currently have 177 people provided with temporary accommodation in hotels, which includes 54 who have been formerly rough sleeping in Leeds. Placements into the hotels has been very swift. Anyone identified as rough sleeping or at imminent risk of rough sleeping has been offered accommodation. In taking this approach, the local authority has also accommodated people who are destitute or have no recourse to public funds. Everyone placed in emergency accommodation throughout the COVID-19 pandemic is being supported in a number of practical ways. This includes the delivery of food and hygiene packs. It is the intention that the Council will respond to every placement made with an appropriate exit strategy for individuals which will meet their short, medium and longer term accommodation needs. We are aware of a small increase in begging activity in the city as we move out of lockdown. These numbers, however, are not on the scale seen pre-pandemic. We have seen and had reported 1 or 2 incidents of begging in the outer areas, and we are tackling the issue with an array of tactics, including use of the criminal justice process and, where appropriate, antisocial behaviour legislation. We continue to work with colleagues from neighbourhood policing teams and Safer Leeds antisocial behaviour team to tackle the issue.
Thank you. Councillor Gettin, any? Councillor Gettin, have you finished? Councillor Reagan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can the executive member detail the contributions made by the council's key workers during the pandemic to keep Leeds environmentally safe and clean?
Councillor Rafiq.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, the recent lockdown and restrictions have demonstrated the huge importance of keeping our local environments clean, safe and welcoming for our residents. And before I go to talk about the services within my portfolio, and indeed we've already mentioned across the council, I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank those who actually work in the NHS, the care sector, the public and private transport sectors, and in particular the volunteers and the gig economy, Lord Mayor. Workers in our parks and countryside team have kept our parks and green spaces well maintained for both physical activities and to benefit our residents' mental health and general well-being in being outdoors and connecting with nature. Parks and green spaces have been open since the start of restrictions imposed as a result of coronavirus epidemic, and the gardening staff in parks and countryside have continued to carry out horticultural maintenance. As restrictions continue to be relaxed, parks continue to be a local focal point for people to meet and to enjoy recreational activities, Lord Mayor. Our forestry team have continued to ensure that all emergency and urgent tree works are dealt with promptly and effectively. We should also thank our bereavement services team, who have continued to work throughout the pandemic to ensure that burials and cremations continue and provide the best available service to bereaved families in difficult circumstances. Our environmental services team have played a huge role in keeping our communities clean. Although the lockdown is easing, we
Councillor Rafiq, are you there? Could you unmute? Is it on? Councillor Rafiq, could you unmute your mic, please? Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's happened. Okay, I'll start again. Since the lockdown, Lord Mayor, over 6.5 million wheelie bins have been emptied and over 81,500 tonnes of waste collected by our dedicated frontline key workers. Over 7,500 tonnes of waste was collected citywide in the first week in June, compared to 4,500 tonnes in the same week last year. These are truly unprecedented record-breaking figures, possibly even nationally, and at a time when these key workers have own anxieties and family concerns to deal with. In May, the council began to reopen household waste and recycling centres, and within 3 weeks, all 8 sites were open. 100,000 visit was recently made to the household recycling centres, Lord Mayor. A decision was taken to reopen using a bespoke booking system to help manage the expected queues and make the visits safer for residents. This has proved exceptionally successful with the safe way. Over 350 key worker staff have worked throughout lockdown and refuse, many doing extra hours and working in the most challenging of conditions. But fortunately, we have not had one worker test positive for COVID-19. The Council's environmental health team has also continued to operate throughout the pandemic, providing key services in relation to environmental and health protection. The team's work includes a lead role in the Council's COVID outbreak management plan, working with businesses and workplaces across Leeds to prevent and control outbreaks. The team have responded to around 500 requests for COVID-related advice from businesses over the last 3 months. Lord Mayor, environmental health workers have continued to provide a citywide range of statutory services, including the regulation of food premises, pollution control, health and safety and retail and leisure sectors, commercial nuisance, and animal health and welfare. The dog wardens and pest control service have continued to operate throughout the period and have dealt with increased levels of requests for service from the public. While the capping may have stopped, but the demands on our key workers have not gone away or even slowed down yet. Not only do they deserve our thanks for the massive contribution they've have made, but our continued support as the impact of the pandemic remains a significant challenge for the foreseeable future. I'd like to, Lord Mayor, thank every one of them for their hard work, and I'm sure all the colleagues here in this meeting today will do so as well. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Reagan, any supplementary?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Given that the necessary technology is now available, will the Legal Council guarantee that hybrid meetings of the Exec Board and Council, with some members attending in person and other members joining virtually, will be put in place for the September cycle, and that licensing subcommittees, plans panels and scrutiny boards will begin hybrid meetings immediately?
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Carter. After the start of this meeting, I've never been so pleased to get to a question from you. I think I would say that, as we saw, it's maybe we're not as far ahead as we think we are with the technology, and obviously for hybrid meetings, the technology is crucial because we still need to include people who are either shielding or isolated or aren't keen to come in to meetings. I know we're on a journey on this. There's been a few bumps on the way, but we're getting on with it. There's been work done around how we can operate rooms in the Civic Hall, and I believe the IT equipment has been surveyed later this week. What I would say is we're very clear that we want to bring hybrid meetings in as soon as it's practically possible, but one of our underlying principles, again, is that we don't want any second-class councillors. So everybody, whether they're in the meeting or at home, shouldn't be excluded from that. I don't, as we've seen where with meetings so far, the technology works. Sometimes we want it to work all the time, and we'll be happy to move to hybrid meetings once we've got all the technology, the health and safety, and all the other assessments like equalities in place. Finally, I'd just like to thank the staff that work on these meetings. I understand it takes 3 times as many staff to do an online meeting than it does a meeting in the room, which I know is a great effort from the staff involved. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Carter.
Yes, my Lord Mayor. Councillor Lewis, I hope, will be aware of the latest LGA advice that we should be trying to set up hybrid meetings, and that was guidance of the 4th of July. Would you also agree with me that the Council, as has been illustrated throughout today's meeting, is facing a whole string of significant challenges, as are the people of this city? It is therefore imperative, as the technology is available, that his administration instructs officers to get ahead and provide the necessary technology to enable these hybrid meetings to take place, so his administration can be held properly to account as the government is being in London.
Yeah, completely agree, Councillor Carter. As you may be aware, we've worked with WIP, so every party's been involved in the development of scrutiny board meetings, exec board meetings, this meeting, and we will continue to do so. Don't disagree with anything you said.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. We have run out of time for questions, so all members that didn't have the chance to ask their question will have a written answer. We'll move on to item 9, Executive Board. Councillor Blake.
Can I move to the notice, Lord Mayor?
Councillor Dawson.
Second, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. I'm afraid you probably can see me as well. Apologies for the unkempt look, but my barber's not open yet. Anyway, on to business. I'm very proud to be speaking on this paper, which draws together all the work Leeds City Council is doing to address and tackle disability inequality. This is something I'm really passionate about, and although there's still a long way to go, I'm really pleased that Leeds is making such strides towards supporting disabled people and making our services fully accessible. Leeds is a fantastic city to live, but we need to ensure it's a fantastic city for everyone. If we truly want to be the best city, then we have to be the best for every member of our society. It's simply not enough to say that we are child and age friendly for some, but not all. Barriers to equality still exist, and it is only by working together that we will finally be able to knock them down. What the COVID pandemic showed us was just how supportive local communities can be. We've heard some of that from other members today. The network of volunteers, both existing and new, that sprang into action across Leeds was humbling to witness. However, I must reference a report by the Office of National Statistics back in April, which found that as well as disabled adults being more likely to have to self-isolate than non-disabled adults, they were also more likely to report spending too much time alone and feeling lonely. We also know that disabled people are more likely to be affected by poverty, something that has been exacerbated by COVID-19. It's become clearer than ever that the work we are doing to address inequality is absolutely vital. From access to jobs and training courses to highways works and work with taxis to ensure accessibility, through to accessible playgrounds and leisure facilities, there is so much we can do and are doing to level the playing field and make Leeds work for everybody. We are committed to working with the third sector, charities and campaign groups to ensure their voice is heard, so policies and developments are fully inclusive. In-house, so to speak, I'm delighted, and I'll highlight the facts that we are recognised as a disability confident employer, enabling us as an employer to make the most of the talents which disabled people can bring to the workplace. Disability confident employers are recognised as going the extra mile to make sure that disabled people and those with certain health conditions get a fair chance when applying for job vacancies. I believe we are leading from the front and know that the staff networks are very much valued by council employees. The Disability and Wellbeing Network and the Healthy Minds Peer Support Network both provide the peer-to-peer support and help influence policy and systems. The aim is for Leeds City Council to be a place where disabled people want to come and work. I think we are well on our way and look forward to seeing just how fast we can progress this agenda. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Gruen, Caroline Gruen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm speaking on 2 minutes, tackling disabilities and the expansion of Leeds West Academy. On the former, the paper states that poverty is a barrier that limits what people can do and be. The implication of this for our schools and our children is absolutely fundamental. It should be embedded in every school's equality policy. I'm pleased to say that tackling poverty through unique learning experiences is at the heart of the Leeds West Academy curriculum. And the Academy is to increase its overall capacity from 1,200 to 1,500 students by increasing the admission number in Year 7 from 240 to 300 from September 2022. And I'm delighted to welcome this permanent expansion. It's an excellent example of Leeds West Academy, the White Rose Academies Trust and the Council working successfully together to enable the Council to successfully ensure that meet its statutory obligation to ensure there are sufficient school places for every child in Leeds. As a Governor of Leeds West Academy and a member of the White Rose Academies Trust Board, I'm keenly aware that the Trust sponsor wants to continue to work closely with the local authority and currently wishes to see more councillors as governors of its 3 schools, directors of its Trust Board, or within the wider governance structure of the Luminate Education Group. The executive principal of the 3 White Rose secondary schools, formerly the principal of Leeds West, has promoted the partnership of the council through his role on the local authority's secondary bronze group, sharing our plans with the wider group of head teachers and children's services to support the wider reopening of schools. I'm very proud too that Leeds West has, in recent years, achieved huge improvements in attainment and progress, breaking all-time records for the school and its predecessor school, Intake High. And this has made a very positive impact on the way the community perceives the school. With over 290 first choice applications for this September, it is now one of the most oversubscribed schools in the city. Uniquely, this learning continues through an extended working day for the Year 7s, who stay on for a third part of a day and enjoy a wide range of activities that they wouldn't ordinarily experience, provided by Leeds City College. Year 7 students then go on to graduate at the end of the year, a major event held at Leeds University. And I must also say, Lord Mayor, that particularly over this challenging and dangerous COVID period, Leeds West and its staff, and I mean all the staff, the cleaners, the office staff, the lunchtime workers, the catering staff, the classroom and leadership teams have all, in their own way, shown immense compassion, care and empathy for every student and their families, putting them steadfastly before themselves to the point of exhaustion. To see this with my own eyes has been truly humbling. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor and fellow councillors, I'm speaking today on minute 11, page 221. This paper highlights all of the good work Leeds City Council is undertaking when it comes to addressing and tackling inequality, disability inequality. I want to focus on adult social care and talk about just some of the things that we are doing to help people live independent lives. It is important to be clear that in this context, when we are talking about people with disabilities, we do not just mean physical disabilities, we mean those with mental health needs, people with learning disabilities, people with autism, those with long-term conditions, older people living with frailty, and with those dementia. We have a number of services that mean people are able to stay in their own homes for longer. This includes long-term provisions such as telecare, which enables us to respond to emergency and short-term support through our Skills for Independent Living service. Local to me is Osmondthorpe Hub, where our physical impairment service supports adults with a range of impairments, including neurological conditions, as well as supporting our personal care. There are a variety of health, well-being, social activities, such as pottery, literature. We highly rely on our third sector partners who come together under Forum Central, and I would like to put on record my thanks to all of them. The COVID-19 has really demonstrated just how much we as a city need our volunteers networks and just how valuable their work is. What a massive difference it makes. This report shows how much we are already doing across every directorate within the council. But we know that as a city, we still have a long way to go. We remain committed to working with all of our partners to ensure equality and disability for people with working with all our partners to ensure equality and accessibility for people with disabilities, whatever those disabilities may be. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bettel.
Lord Mayor, inequality of any kind is to be abhorred, and I'm incredibly pleased to be able to take this opportunity to mention the quality of the measures Leeds City Council is taking to stamp out that inequality with regard to disability. Dedicated hard work is really making a difference. I would extend the need to tackle inequality, however, to the need to ensure educational equality, including the ability to attend a local school. Young people deserve the option to attend a school in their own community so that they can develop a network of friends and support that will assist them as they develop into young adults. In South Leeds, this right is being put in danger. We need to be crystal clear why we're in the situation that we are, because I'm done with hearing that the council knew for ages and did nothing. The facts are, yes, we knew, and we approached government with the numbers and told them exactly what we needed. Some dates from the timeline for anyone that's unfamiliar. The original permission to establish the Lawrence Calvert Academy was given in April 2017. A paper went to Exec Board in September 2018, clearly stating, and I'm quoting directly from the report, the Education and Skills Funding Agency is now tasked with the delivery of this new school and provision of Year 7 places by 2020. It could not be clearer. We identified the need. The government then had the responsibility of building the school. It's fair to say that the project encountered difficulties, and we've worked alongside the DFE and the MAT to find a way through these difficulties not of our making, I hasten to add. So now we have a situation whereby children in South Leeds are without the school that 3 years ago we told the DFE we needed. In fact, the DFE still haven't shared a programme of works with us and are only looking to submit a planning application in December, which will be a full 10 months since the design was agreed. Someone has taken their eye off the ball here, but it wasn't the council. When your powers to build and open new schools have been removed, you become completely reliant on those who claim these powers. What this has demonstrated is that providing school places on time for children in South Leeds is not a priority for this Conservative government. Indeed, it's not even a priority for our local Conservatives, who have gone out of their way to attempt to even further delay the provision of school places for these children. Last week's call-in was a disgrace and served only to highlight the complete ineptitude of the government. I have no doubt that had this been a school in a Conservative-held ward, they would have insisted we move heaven and earth to get papers passed and places provided. But because it was South Leeds and a Labour ward, they decided to play politics with the education of children. To use my teacher voice, I'm really disappointed, and yes, you should have known better.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was pleased to read the report discussed in March on what the Council is doing to tackle inequality as a result of disability. We're making good progress, and as Chair of the Licensing Committee, I'm particularly proud that 50% of our carriage fleet is made up of accessible vehicles and accessibility training is provided for drivers. And I was pleased to read about the work on education for children with special educational needs and disabilities, as well as recognition that there's still more to do in tackling disability inequality. I'd like to take this opportunity, as others have, to thank our volunteers and key workers for their hard work over the last few months, including our taxi and private hire drivers, NHS and care workers, and our teachers and school staff. Unfortunately, despite our efforts with disability and inequality in schools, an area of inequality in our education system, mentioned by Councillor Biffle there, where I'm afraid no action appears to be forthcoming, is that of school funding. It's welcome news that Benton Park School will get the investment it needs, and I'd like to thank Councillor Pryor and our officers for working their hardest to find the funding needed to do this. I'd also like to thank Councillor Pryor for his recent letter to the Secretary of State for Education asking for funding to rebuild 2 further schools that are in just as desperate need, Wetherby and Royds High Schools. Royds is a school which a number of children in my ward attend. Pupils and the staff I've just thanked deserve a high quality building to learn and teach effectively in. Staff like Kate Davison, business manager at Royds, who at the beginning of March reached out to councillors in the wards of her pupils, concerned about the 50% of students receiving pupil premium funding, who Kate and the school staff were worried could go hungry should the school have to close at short notice. The staff at Royds clearly care about their students, and both deserve a quality learning environment. For the past 2 years, this administration has been writing to government, raising in the media, even meeting with Whitehall officials last year to ask for help with rebuilding these schools. And yet, in spite of reassuring nods and murmurs of understanding, nothing has been done. The extent of repairs required means that it's not cost effective to carry them out. A total rebuild is the only option. And the local MP, Alex Shelbrooke, has been sent copies of all letters asking for this help. And yet not once has he been in touch to either acknowledge them or offer his assistance. £1 billion was recently announced by the government for the rebuild of 50 schools over the next 10 years, but the pupils of Wetherby and Royds don't have 10 years. They've already waited far too long. At a time where schools have gone above and beyond when it comes to providing education in exceptional circumstances, ensuring key workers at the childcare needed to keep the country running, and vulnerable children were safe, I have to ask, where's the government's commitment to them? We found the funding needed for Benton Park. We demonstrated our commitment to the children of Leeds. The government needs to step up and demonstrate theirs. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Wenham. Councillor Wenham. You're muted. Could you undo your mute?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was assured to see just how much we as a councillor are doing to promote equality, to assess all across all of our service. This is much important area and one which can also tackle through education, ensuring all children are taught to recognise and promote increased equality. I know that Allerton Grange in my ward focus on promoting equality, and I have no doubt this will continue when they expand. Allerton Grange is a very popular school in my ward, and I know that I am not alone in welcoming its expansion. Local families want their children to be able to attend a local school, and so this expansion is very much needed. Ensuring there are enough places for every child in the city is becoming increasingly difficult and has been hampered, as we have heard, by the fact that the council can no longer build or open new schools. Our hands are completely tied. We either rely on others to deliver school places on time, or we expand existing schools. We are lucky that schools in Leeds, in most cases, are happy to work with us to ensure every child has a place. We have seen over the past 3.5 months just how vital our schools are. They have worked tirelessly to make sure children in Leeds have received an education. We have seen schools remain open for vulnerable children and the children of key workers, and we have seen them promote online education for thousands of others. They have remained open during the school holidays to provide childcare, enabling key workers to go to work and keep the country running. We cannot thank them enough for what they have done. Unfortunately, there are some children who now will not go back to school. They left in March, and this must be an increasingly unsettling feeling for them. But others, we know, the school will be working hard over the summer to ensure they are ready and safe welcome pupils back in September. I am optimistic and like to think that by the time Allerton Grange is welcoming its additional 60 pupils next September, we will be living in a world much closer to one we will enjoy pre-COVID-19. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you. If I may, Lord Mayor, I'd like to begin by actually agreeing with much of what Councillor Ritchie and his very fine beard said at the head of this piece. He flagged up, my Lord Mayor, the importance of focusing on what Leeds City Council can do to tackle important issues. And much of what he said I absolutely agree with and endorse. I would want now, Lord Mayor, to focus on those minutes seeking to create new and additional school places here in the city. I always find it strange when Labour members say we can't open new schools. Well, that's simply not the case. What we are able to do is have new schools where we identify there is a need for them, but we have to bid for, and they have to be opened as academies. And I know the administration still struggles with some of that. That is a mechanism to open a school in an area that is needed. It becomes an academy and contributes to our dynamic school mixed economy. Equally, notwithstanding what Councillor Bithell says, one could believe that it's only Labour wards that struggle with school places. She will be aware that North Leeds has traditionally, my ward of All Woodley, has significant issues with school places, both in primary and secondary school. the primary school is easing slowly, thanks to an academy that we have here now. But high schools are and continue to be a challenge. And I always find it strange that one of the best schools in the city, which is Allerton High School, isn't allowed to expand, even though it has sought to do so. It never seems to be in the ward of Woodley, never seems to be good value for money, though I see there's less concern to spend that kind of money in other parts of the city. But here we have one of the finest schools in the city that would dearly love to expand, would dearly love to ensure that more young people were able to benefit from the tremendous education it provides. And yet we don't seem to be willing to assist. And again, not an academy, one of our own schools, we don't seem to be willing to work in the same way with it. I'll leave it there, my Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Speaking to minute 172, I welcome the formation of a new free school in East Leeds, a mixed collection of education providers competing to raise attainment, offer choice and promote contrasting ethos is surely a good thing for the city. But I fear the council is once again tying itself up in knots over school place provision. The papers presented in respect of minute 172 confirm that 17.5 forms of entry are required by 2023-24, yet this new free school only provides 8 forms of entry. It's my understanding that the council is going to attempt to add another 9 forms of entry to existing schools in the east, schools that are already struggling both in terms of attainment and school place pressures. And I believe there's no plan to deal with the shortage of SEM places in the area either. This means the administration is opting to use large sums of finite basic needs grant funding. Once again, you'd therefore think that the administration would snap the hand off of any multi-academy trust wanting to alleviate that pressure on council budgets by instead providing one new free school to deliver the remaining 9 forms of entry that the council's own report says it needs. In his summing up, I wonder if the executive member could confirm that the authority will support any free school application that would in turn spare the need for the use of basic needs grant funding unnecessarily. And finally, Lord Mayor, referring to the Inner East, the report states that the gradual move away from the outer North East schools as the preferred option for some in Inner East Leeds families is adding further pressure to the need for school places in this area. I'm not sure the administration recognises the impact of statements such as these. It could be perceived that it is now the position of the authority to proactively reduce the numbers on roll at Wetherby High School. If this is the intention, then I'm sure even the executive member himself can see the problem of tying the noose with one hand while removing the stool with the other. The saga of school place provision is one that has long dogged Leeds. It would be wrong to put all the blame squarely at the door of the council, as the issue is multifaceted, but the actions, or lack thereof, by the council in accelerating these pressures, and it will therefore be sensible, surely, that it's time to consider an alternative approach to sorting out this mess. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Pat Latty. Councillor Latty.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I'm speaking on minute 160, page 233. Can you hear me?
I can.
Right. About the rebuild and expansion of Benton Park School in my ward. Lord Mayor, this is a very welcome news for our area, but principally for the parents, pupils and teachers and everyone associated with Benton Park. The current condition of the school buildings is in many cases poor. Some of the blocks are no longer fit for purpose and require completely rebuilding. And on any view, it is clear that the buildings have reached the end of their lifespan. Members may recall the extraordinary situation at the beginning of the year when the roof of the main building was badly damaged by high winds. The school had to be closed and pupils' education was disrupted. This only underlines the case for the rebuilding of the school. The scheme that Executive Board approved and will rebuild the main teaching block and expand the published admissions number, and also ensure continuity of an SEN partnership base located on site. The scheme will provide a modern, fit-for-purpose learning environment for children and young people, and it is nothing less than they deserve. We all know there's been significant disruption to children's education during the COVID-19 pandemic. Teachers, pupils and parents have coped brilliantly with home learning, but there is something valuable and worthwhile about the school experience, learning together with friends and having pride in your school. Even now, as restrictions ease and we start to see more children return, it's unlikely that things will be fully back to normal for some time. Schemes like the Benton Park rebuild offer some hope that eventually these children, after months of disruption and difficulties, will be able to learn in buildings that are safe and aren't susceptible to strong winds. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak also on minute 160. I'd just like to start by emphasising how much assistance the government is providing for the rebuild of Benton Park. Out of the £28 million cost, the debt costs of nearly £90 million council borrowing will be funded from the capital maintenance grant in future years. This is money from the government. Similarly, £5.4 million will come from the basic need grant funding, and £3.2 million will come from the current capital maintenance grant, all money emanating from central government. Specifically on COVID funding, I also welcome the government investment of £1 billion in a catch-up tutoring fund to schools, over 1/3 of which is aimed at the most disadvantaged children. And it's the latter group I would like to concentrate most on today. Unfortunately, there's a fundamental weakness between the arrangements between specialist schools and mainstream schools, in the sense that there are no formal agreements in place to protect families, such as a service level agreement. This is where children who are on education, health and care plans, or have been moved to schools from silks, basically have an unofficial arrangement with mainstream schools. It's an absolute godsend to the parents in question, and particularly children with the most profound conditions. Unfortunately, a failure of the system was vividly demonstrated in Benton Park when a decision was taken in 2018 to close the post-16 SEN provision from September this year. One of the reasons parents and I were given for the closure was that the council had asked Benton Park to accept a bulge cohort of students so that additional classroom space could be freed. In fact, no such request had ever been made, and indeed there was no bulge at any stage. Parents were not told formally about the closure until March 2019, and the consequences of that decision linger on to this day. The closure decision did reveal shortcomings in the annual reviews of education, health and care plans, unfortunately, and it looks very much as if timetables have been ignored and the questionable quality of some plans left a lot to be desired. I'm talking about a period now before the lockdown actually started. The 2014 Education Act placed children at the heart of such plans, which should never become a bureaucratic chore. The closure decision caused enormous heartache and worry for the parents affected and illustrated the need for formal arrangements. The closure decision was a matter for Benton Park alone because of these informal arrangements, and no one, basically officers, parents, children or elected members, could challenge that decision. That cannot be right when we're talking about the most vulnerable children in Leeds.
Councillor Latsy. Sorry, Councillor Finn.
Just finishing off, Lord Mayor, these decisions have profound effects on vulnerable children and their families, so it's essential that the Council acts urgently to ensure the formal agreements are in place in future. Thank you very much indeed, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
My Lord Mayor, Councillor Lamb's just been booted out of the meeting again. If you could swap him and Councillor Robinson, it'd be hugely appreciated while we're trying to get him back on.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I wish to speak to minute 11, minute 12 from the Executive Board report in March on the disability equality improvement work and the Great Jobs agenda. On the disability equality report, I think it's a very welcome report, and I'm very pleased to see that the Council is leading the way. I think the Council has a great opportunity, given that of its 14,901 employees or people working for the Council, 6% are disabled. That's a great opportunity to be a best practice employer for the rest of the city and to set an example for businesses all across Leeds and across West Yorkshire, I should add too. What I'd love to see in future reports are examples of local best practice that are taking place. For example, Osman House in Skulls in my ward does some brilliant work with Skulls Community Care. It's about engaging two different groups, taking those who are disabled and engaging with an older population in the village to make sure that they feel a part of the community. Similarly, I think that Parks and Countryside have done a lot of good work in the past, and I know in my own ward in Shadwell, we're looking at revamping the playground and looking at equipment that will be suitable for those with a disability. I think it's that sort of future planning that allows us to make sure that everybody feels a really important member of the community here in Leeds. In terms of the Great Jobs agenda, the report notes that the City of Leeds is an economically buoyant one, or rather was when the report was written, and had the fastest private sector job growth of any UK city. We are absolutely going to need that to happen all over again and for that hard work to take place again. And the Council has an important role working with the Chamber of Commerce, the Federation of Small Businesses and others to not just talk about the jobs agenda, but to talk about an employment landscape and a growth landscape that encourages business to thrive in this city. I note one quote from the report that said, "Work provides an important source of income and routine for people." And they are absolutely right. It is work is something that has allowed so many people to change their life chances, to have opportunities that they wouldn't have seen before. And a growing economy here in Leeds allows us to have diverse businesses opening in this city. In the interests of diversity, it would be wrong for me to not mention the sort of cancel culture that has taken place over the last few years. I think it's detrimental to people in work, where we stigmatise people who have different opinions to those of our own. And if we want a diverse city, that cannot just be around race, colour or creed. It has to be about thought as well. And we have to make sure that Leeds is an open and welcoming place. Finally, I would note that in this report, the HR officers have done a sterling job over the last few months and continue to do so in engaging with the unions and engaging with employees across the council and making sure that we represent everybody's views and ensure that they have a voice that when they come to the table. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Okay. Is Councillor Lamb back in now? Councillor Lamb?
Tragically not, my Lord Mayor. We're still trying.
Okay, Councillor Marshall to come.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. In Leeds, we believe that everyone should have the opportunity to access their economic potential regardless of their background. Our commitment to the TUC's Great Jobs agenda is a firm basis for this and is strongly aligned with our existing commitments to inclusive growth. Coronavirus is the biggest crisis of most of our lifetime. Although it is still too early to know the exact size of the economic shock caused by this virus, initial data suggests a sharp and deep recession. We already know that the crisis has exacerbated existing inequalities. We must not allow the burden to fall hardest on those who can least afford to bear it. For some time in Leeds, we have prioritized inclusive growth. What matters is giving everyone across the city the chance to benefit from a strong economy. Now more than ever, it is essential that we continue to ensure that our long-term plans reduce inequality and create a city where people and businesses can grow. The Leeds Anchors Network will continue to play a significant role here. The network and its wider engagement with employers in Leeds is offering important opportunities to unlock transformational change and outcomes to address inequalities in our city. This involves major public sector organizations and 1 or 2 private sector agencies in the city. The anchor institution work has been developed with Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Leeds Beckett University. It recognizes the valuable social impact that big organizations like colleges, universities, hospitals, and big businesses can have, and how they can improve the life chances of people in our city. The Leeds Inclusive Anchors Network now comprises 11 organizations based in the city with over 57,000 employees, 1 in 7 of the Leeds workforce, and an annual expenditure in excess of £2 billion per year. The network is bringing forward opportunities that direct more of their spending locally through procurement, foster healthy workplaces, and help local people to access jobs in anchor organizations. Examples include building on the successful approach work undertaken by the Hospitals Trust, initially in Bermondsey and Richmond Hill ward, and expanding out to other priority neighborhoods. Here, targeted work with the local community has seen some 49 jobs filled at St. James's Hospital. We know that exactly intervening to help people make their contribution to the City of Leeds is a win-win for all of us. Finally, my Lord Mayor, and going forward, we will continue to support anchor organizations to take practical steps to boost their contribution to inclusive growth so that we make a real difference to local employment, incomes, and our economy. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Is Councillor Lamb with us? Councillor Lamb?
Still
Councillor...
not. Great fun, this. No, my Lord Mayor, sorry.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I'm so proud to live in a city that has recognised the complexity of poverty and is taking bold steps in a multi-pronged approach to address these complexities. It's striking that the risk of poverty is higher for people who will have been worst hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly disabled people and Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. We are leading by example in our commitment to pay all our staff at least a real living wage as calculated by the Living Wage Foundation. The living wage as calculated by the government is 58p lower. The TUC's Great Jobs Agenda sets out that all workers should be fairly paid, have guaranteed hours, work in a safe and healthy environment, be treated decently, have a voice at work, and get the chance to get on in life. It notes that too many workers are currently in jobs that do not meet these most basic of standards. It calls on employers to recognise and work with trade unions to make great jobs a reality for all. Since 2018, we've been aligned with the TUC's Great Jobs Agenda and, I'm pleased to say, working closely with recognised trade unions. We care about public services. Paying more means better recruitment and retention of staff at a time when public sector pay has been badly hit nationwide. We are, through our inclusive growth strategy, continuing with our place-based approach, working with, supporting and working towards expanding the Leeds Anchors network. Leeds Anchors offer great jobs, a decent rate of pay, employment and training opportunities for those who live in areas with higher numbers of people who are unemployed or in insecure or low paid work. I'm incredibly proud also that this council is committing to becoming an accredited living wage employer. To become accredited, an organisation must ensure its supply chain also pays a real living wage. The council will continue to use our leadership role as a large employer in the city and as a member of the Leeds City Region Economic Partnership and the Leeds Bid to encourage more to pay the real living wage. It's economics at its most basic. Pay people the real living wage for their labour and they'll be able to afford a decent standard of living. A fair wage increases the amount of money in circulation in the local economy, which in turn creates more jobs in Leeds. We as elected representatives owe it to the 91,000 residents in Leeds earning less than the living wage to do whatever we can to improve pay and conditions throughout the city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Trustwell.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. While endorsing the comments of Councillor Ritchie and my Labour colleagues on minute 11, page 221, I want to concentrate on minute 10, That minute relates to the chronic shortage of high school places in South Leeds, the failure of the government to progress the promised new Lawrence Calvert High School, and the short-term expedients required to fill that gap. Now, as a born masochist, I treated myself to the recent calling epic staged by Councillor Stevenson on this issue. From a South Leeds perspective, it felt like an alien spaceship had landed in our midst. The analogy seems fitting because this alien visitor spouted lots of figures without reflecting on either the human beings or the detail behind the figures. And it reminded me that when the French people were short of bread, Marie Antoinette reportedly said, "Let them eat cake." Well, Councillor Stevenson's response to the shortage of high school places in South Leeds seemed to be, "Let them catch buses." Lord Mayor, in March, Councillor Pryor, Hilary Benn MP and I met with anxious and angry parents. Some had been allocated schools as far away as Seacroft, a wonderful place with equally wonderful councillors, but not exactly on their doorstep. And they raised understandable concerns about wanting their children to go to their nearest local schools, the splitting of friendship groups, transition arrangements, family and support dynamics, transport, and the really daunting appeals process. Lord Mayor, it's now 53 years since I made that transition from primary school to high school, and I still remember the trauma. A quirk in local government boundaries meant that I went to a different school to that of my friends and peers. And the notion of friendship groups may seem alien to some, but it's an extremely important psychological factor for young people making the transition to high school. So, Lord Mayor, I would say that if the Tories seek any credibility on education issues, they really need to have a chat with their Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, the man who does a very passable impression of Frank Spencer and who seems to run his department in a very similar fashion. Please tell him that we desperately need the long overdue new schools like Lawrence Calvert and the rebuilding of others. Tell him we need to end the fragmentation of our education system and the responsibilities within it. And above all, tell him we need to restore to councils like Leeds the ability to build schools where we need them and when we need them. And Lord Mayor, I think that would also be a really good example of devolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lennox.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Lord Mayor, I attended the recent call-in on this particular minute, and I have to say it was not an easy or productive process, as not only were we contending with new formats and technologies, which have worked really well in my experience up until today, and I'd just like to recognise the efforts which have been made by our IT and training staff around this. Not only were we presented with that, but in the moment we were given vast amounts of confusing and irrelevant detail which hadn't previously been made available for members of the board to digest, and which made the discussion really difficult. We were told that, as is due process, the relevant member who brought the call in had been briefed numerous times in advance of the meeting with regard to the details of the exec board decision and with what he was going to say, and yet the information presented was still confused and inaccessible. And so, given the amount of upheaval that the call in itself caused and the dialogue that's followed, I think it's worth taking this opportunity to once again clarify some of the information covered in the meeting and in the original decision and ensure that we've got accuracy here. Firstly, the assertion that basic need funding was misspent or is being misspent. Basic needs funding is not ring-fenced, and although this administration has always chosen to spend it on the provision of additional school places, be they temporary or permanent, while Coburn has already expanded its intake over its building's capacity, going by the DfE's own guidance, the money is being spent on much needed additional school places in this decision. It was claimed that a number of other schools could have helped to meet the need for these places, but unfortunately, not that we could expect the opposition group in question to concern themselves with this, but inner South and outer South Leeds are two distinctly different places. The need is in the inner South, meaning that there are 3 local schools who could have helped. Coburn, John Charles and Ruth Gorse, which is a free school that the DfE built at a cost of approximately 22 million. Ruth Gorse were asked whether they could take the additional pupils, but they refused. The presentation in the call-in repeatedly referenced a missed opportunity at Royds, but as became clear in the discussion, this was untrue. Extensive discussion did take place with Royds, but given the fact that they were under an academy order at the time, they felt they couldn't help. And it's important to note that Royds is a trust school. We do not own the land which the school sits on, and we are not the admitting authority for that school. The witnesses that were introduced to give evidence at the call-in, while they spoke very clearly on what their field was, didn't actually help to illustrate anything within the scope of the call-in. The person who spoke from Gorse Mat informed the board about the Mat's desire to open a free school in the east of the city. Indeed, in all the correspondence with the council on this matter, the Gorse Mat said that they could take additional children, they could not take additional children at Ruth Gorse for the south of the city. And while the other witness brought some important points, they were all to do with planning conditions and would be relevant for the relevant plans panel to discuss following a planning application, but not about school place provision. So I'll leave it there, Lord Mayor, because I've no doubt that Councillor Pryor will expand on this in his summing up, but I'm afraid that I'm left with no doubt whatsoever that this call-in was nothing more than political mischief making by their group, simply seeking to derail and distract things. Whatever our schools and our teachers and our children achieve, it's just never enough for the Tory group, is it? Our schools have given this city far more than we have had the right to expect over the last 4 months, and it's about time that that group, I think, gave the respect that they deserve as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Pryor to sum up?
I'm just missing out.
Councillor Pryor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry,
I've not spoken yet.
We have run out of time, Kim. I'm sorry. Councillor Pryor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry, there's a huge amount of speeches there, so I'll try and cover everything as we go through. First of all, Councillor Ritchie, who appears to be shipwrecked in Bramley. He spoke really well about the disability inequality work that actually Councillor Ritchie's been really crucial to. And I think this is really important at the moment when we're looking at kind of how the COVID crisis has affected our citizens and actually how it's affected people with disabilities even more. This is a really key piece of work that we need to keep on top of. And I do thank Councillor Ritchie for the work that he's done across the board on disability. I'm sure he's looking forward to getting back to the access and usability group and making sure that all the developments in the city are inclusive. Councillor Gruen highlighted tackling poverty through school. I know that tackling poverty was something that Councillor Venner was going to speak about today, but I think we ran out of time for that one. And Councillor Gruen spoke really well about the work that's happening at Leeds West Academy and how popular that school is now and how that was the right decision to expand that school. I do have another White Rose Trust school in my own ward, and actually I've seen firsthand the journey that school's been on and how much families have responded to some of that work and how popular that school has become. So I pay credit to the work Councillor Gruen's doing to link between the council and the school. Councillor Khan spoke about disability inequality from an adult social care perspective, and I think Councillor Khan has done a great job in. I don't know if anyone. I think a few councillors have been to these meetings where people with a number of learning disabilities come into the council chamber and take part in our democracy, and that's so important to make what we do as a council accessible to as many people in our city as possible. And Councillor Khan does a fantastic job there. Councillor Khan also highlighted the impact of mental health, and I think that's something in particular we're going to have to look at over the next, well, just going forward from now, due to the number of people who are going to have their own mental health affected throughout lockdown, throughout the pandemic, and the consequences that come with that. Councillor Bithell moved on to educational equality and particularly talking about the need to access schools in people's own locality. She spoke about the Lawrence Calvert School, which, as Councillor Bithell correctly says, was confirmed with the DFE in 2017 to open in 2020, with the ESFA tasked with the provision of this. And that has just not happened. And the problems we have seen all stem from that not happening. And this, you know, this highlights exactly the issue with some of the fragmentation of our education system that I know Councillor Trustwell was talking about. And it actually just demonstrates that providing school places is simply not a priority for this government, and they leave us as councils to pick up the pieces, which is an incredibly difficult task to do when we are ready and telling the government years in advance. Councillor Garner spoke about the education for children with SEND. And again, it's important to note, I've spoken about this in council many times before, some of the cuts to the high needs block we've seen, the millions, tens of millions of pounds cut from children with disabilities who live in Leeds. And it just is a horrific example of how austerity just damages the most vulnerable in society the most. And the cuts they're callous. There's no other word for it. Councillor Garner spoke about Benton Park and how we've managed to pull together a number of pots of money to fund that, and how Royds and Wetherby deserve the same treatment. They deserve a quality building to match the quality of education that's going on inside. And after having spoken to the government for years about this, telling them how desperately we need this funding, the government are just ignoring us. The government are just ignoring us, simply put. They've announced some new money, but it's not way near enough at all, with no guarantees that Wetherby and Royds are included in that. And we will continue to lobby the government to ensure that Wetherby and Royds are both included in that government funding. Councillor Wenham talked about promoting equality in school and spoke about the work that Alton Grange is doing. Obviously, she spoke about how it's best if children attend a local school, and touched upon how councils can't open their own schools anymore, which is a really important point. That was a power which was stripped from councils. Councils cannot open their own schools, which Councillor Cohen went on to talk about and said, actually, we can open new schools. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, we can have new schools where we identify need. Well, we identified need in the south of the city, and what's happened? The government have failed to open a new school. And this highlights exactly that there's an answer for saying, oh yeah.
Councillor Pryor.
Is that my 6 minutes?
Yeah, love, sorry.
Apologies, thank you.
Okay. Can I call on Councillor Blake to come in some more?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Obviously, we don't have enough time to go through some of the other really important minutes that we've discussed over the last 3 months. But actually, I think it's good chance that this portfolio actually came up under scrutiny for the minutes today. I can't think of any more important issue that we need to address coming out of lockdown than the addressing the opportunities and all of the issues that have been raised today for all of our young people. And thank you for all the comments that were made, particularly around the paper on disabilities and also the Good Jobs paper. I really want to just say, on behalf of the council, an enormous thank you to all schools for the incredible work that they've been doing over the last 3 to 4 months. I don't think any of us, unless we've been directly involved, really fully understand just how stressful and difficult it has been for school leaders, for staff, for all staff, not just teaching staff, but all staff who have a responsibility for the well-being of our children. As Councillor Pryor said, we set up Zoom meetings with all of our heads being invited to join very early on, just really to touch base, to make sure that they were all in contact with each other, and really to work with them so that we understood all of the very different challenges that were facing them. Obviously, our school estate, as we've been hearing today, in the terms of the need for rebuilding and developing and expanding, have very different needs. It isn't one size fits all, even in our own local authority, never mind across the country. And I really have enormous sympathy with what they've been having to deal with. If you remember right from the start, there was very little clarity coming out of government in terms of whether schools would have to close or not. And then then the government starts off the rumours and then gets the conversation going. Then a minister would pop up on television in the 5 o'clock briefing slots and announce policy. And then there would be an incredible scramble trying to get guidance to understand what was being intended. I have to tell everyone, this has led to incredible anxiety amongst our teachers and teaching professions and anyone connected with young people. And I think that is unforgivable, given the extraordinary job they had to do in terms of setting up remote learning, setting up the safe arrival into school of key worker children, and dealing actually with the fact that too many parents of our most vulnerable children chose not to send their children into school. But that didn't mean that teachers didn't continue and haven't, they have continued to support them through contacting by phone, by inviting them to come into school, giving work online, but also recognizing that too many of our most vulnerable children don't have access to the IT that they needed to participate. And it's really disappointing to have to note that too many of those pupils still have not received the equipment or the connection to broadband that they were promised right at the start. So we're very conscious that all teachers have taken their responsibility seriously. But what, in terms of numbers of young people returning, what the government seems to have failed to take on board is the way that they've dealt with sharing communication, issuing guidance, then changing the guidance. The lack of clarity has led to a massive loss of confidence amongst parents. And unless they really do address that issue, then we're going to continue to struggle as we go forward. We are doing everything we can, as Councillor Pryor has said, to make sure that all young people can come back into school in September. And whilst we recognise the £1 billion that will go towards extra tuition and other support, what a missed opportunity from government that they didn't support us with the summer activities programme over the school holidays, using all of the work that we know will reach out to children, young people, to engage with them, to get them back into contact with their friends, all the socialisation that we've been concerned about, meeting with our youth officers who could then identify the children who will need extra support come September. And be under no illusion, many young people are going to require a massive additional support when they do come back in. And that whole area of well-being has to be at the forefront of the work we do. And we must work with Ofsted and the government so we don't get into a situation where schools are judged on very narrow performance statistics, which can be a real detriment, whilst we know that actually our young people need so much input in terms of regaining their confidence, their ability to learn, the readiness to learn, and all of the work. You know, the mental health issues that we're seeing now coming forward amongst our young people should trouble us all. And we all have to really focus on how we make amends on that. So thank you for all of the contributions, and particularly around the scrutiny inquiry. Really, I think identifying the problems in terms of the numbers in at the moment in that part of the city, but of course, as everyone has said, problems that affect us all. And I just want to say that actually at local government association level, working with councils across the country, cross-party, all the leaders of children's services, education services are arguing that the powers should be returned to local authorities so that we have full control over the planning of school places in our areas. And it really disappoints me that it seems that the Conservative group on this council aren't supporting their peers around the country. And I really think that they should look very carefully at themselves in the criticisms that they've given to us. We want to take responsibility for that. I just want to specifically mention the situation around Coburn and Lawrence Calvert, because what we know is that the school is anticipated to be built, but there seems to be a question mark now because of further delays about when it will actually open. Can we make sure that we get the firm commitment from the DFE that we can open a temporary allocation for the school, so open it temporarily on a different site, so that next year all of the year sevens that are eligible to go there will have that provision. And sadly, it looks as though that might have to be for 2 years, but for goodness sake, let's all of us pull together and make sure that we're not in the same position as we've been in this year, next year, and the year after. It really is not, it really is unforgivable that families should be put through this, this level of pressure going forward in what is a completely avoidable situation. After all, it's exactly what we did with Ruth Gorse, which we actually helped Ruth Gorse to get the site where the school is. If everyone recalls that, there was quite a lot of debate about where the school should actually go, and we acted with them to make sure they got that location, and they were enabled to open on a temporary provision at Morley High School. Well, if it was good enough for Ruth Gorse and Morley,
Councillor Blake,
it good enough for Inner South Leeds, and I hope we can all work together to get the best outcome for young people going forward. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
thank you. We'll now go for a vote on the minutes. Just to remind members who are going to vote against or abstain, could you please say? All those who agreed with the minute, could you remain silent? I take that's been carried. Thank you. We will now adjourn for 15 minutes break. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.